This episode is brought to you by TikTok for Business. Brat summer is over, but TikTok for Business is just getting started. Whether your marketing goals are brands, performance, or full funnel related, leverage TikTok for Business's insights to drive business growth. You can learn more at tiktok.com/business.
We use our phones for everything, right? And so it is a lot of consuming content and consuming social media and keeping in touch with people. But it's also it's a tool, right? It's what we use to pay. It's what we use to check our finances. It's what we use to look up places to eat. It's what we use to order food. So it's kind of hard to detach from that.
Hey gang, it's Monday, October 7th. Paola, Jenny, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, a new marketer podcast made possible by TikTok. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by two people, both in New York. One of them is our demographics analyst. It's Paola Flores Marquez.
Hello, Marcus. Thank you for having me back so soon.
Of course. We're also joined by our Vice President of All Things Research. It's, of course, Jennifer Pearson.
Hi there.
Hello. So, today's fact. Where do you think is home to the youngest legal driving age in the world?
Ooh, the world.
Yeah, that's hard.
The whole world.
I want to say Mexico because my friends were driving at 12, but
12?
12.
I don't think it was legal. I think it was just a country
That's not
thing.
even remotely legal. Oh my goodness.
Hey, it's the middle of nowhere. You have to get around, and it's a farm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was
That
gonna say,
sounds like, I don't know, there's other ways.
yeah,
Pogo
somewhere
stick.
really rural.
Yeah.
It is America.
What?
South Dakota is home to the youngest. Now, this is, there is technicality here, but South Dakota is home to the youngest legal driving age in the world at just 14 and a half years old. You have to wait to 16 to get your full license, but you can get behind the wheel with your learner's permit, adult supervision, at the age of 14 and change. However, in El Salvador, you can obtain a full driver's license at the age of 15, making it the country with the youngest legal driving age in the world.
All right.
Cool.
That's too young.
Yeah.
What are we doing? 12's insanity.
Yeah.
But that's too young. Although I was looking into it, not that I'm going to be getting into babysitting, but there's no legal limit. There's no legal minimum age to babysit in basically every US state, bar 2. So to take care of a human life, no age limit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, latchkey kids took care of themselves. What do we
Makes
need babies
sense.
for?
This is madness. What's happening? Come on, America. Pull yourself together. Anyway, today's real topic. How each generation spends their digital time. So Paola, you just put together some research on digital habits by generation, looking at where and how they are spending their digital time. Shopping, using social media, watching video, etc. So we're going to go through each of them. Let's start with the youngest cohort, Gen Z. So roughly, although, Jenny, you did send this to me before the recording. I didn't look. 12 to 26?
12 to 27. Yeah. We're talking 12 to 27. Close enough.
Okay. I'll do. So 12 to 27 is the age range for the Gen Z cohort. Paola, start with you. What was the most interesting finding from this Gen Z generation regarding how their digital behavior is changing?
I mean, I wouldn't say changing. Digital video is still their top habit.
Okay.
I think
how
the
it
way,
currently is.
so 96% of them engage in digital video. What I do think is interesting about them is that there are little to no barriers between the type of digital video that they consume. Like they feed off of each other, whether it's social or long form media. It's kind of cyclical. So 60% of Gen Zers prefer user generated content. So we're talking people made videos and reels and TikToks over subscription video on demand, according to Deloitte. And part of that is because they're overwhelmed by the choice, right? Having to look through all these catalogs, having to sift through Netflix for what's entertaining. And so they rely on their algorithm to sort of point them in the right direction because the algorithm's tailored to their desires and needs and interests. And so, you're getting fan cams, you're getting clips from shows, you're getting memes referring to something. So it is a different way of engaging with that content than previous generations where it was very siloed.
Yeah, and a lot of what we consume now is video, right? So it's just it's a greater share of the pie. Particularly social media, it's driven that. I think it was 1/3 of content on social media was digital video like 4 or 5 years ago. Now it's 2/3.
Yeah.
And so you used to have user generated content, and then you had kind of more highly produced kind of Netflix type studio type content, and then you have all the stuff on social media, the short clips, the longer clips, and so there's just so much video in the world that it's almost impossible to not consume it as a young person.
It's super interesting too, because Facebook kind of predicted that like a couple years ago, like in 2013, 14, and they started pushing everyone to pivot to video. And then it didn't really work, and it killed a lot of independent sites. And then TikTok figured it out, and Vine figured it out. And here we are today.
Yeah.
I think what's so interesting about this, I was reading an Ipsos study that a lot of the younger generation, Gen Z, is watching these videos alone on their device. So on a mobile phone and an iPad, a tablet. And that has kind of shifted how all this younger generation is consuming content in relation to social. And I'm not saying social media. I mean, just our social mores and collective viewing habits and getting together. And as Pal mentioned, so much of it is quick clips and user-generated content. But it's so interesting to think of it as a solitary media activity.
Yeah, it kind of silos interests too, right? So like you don't really get that shared experience that you used to get from like quoting Anchorman at each other. But like,
yeah, it's a great point.
We talked to Hasbro a couple of months ago having this conversation about how sometimes Gen Zers are looking for a communal experience, which is one of the reasons things like Barbenheimer was so big, because it was an opportunity to participate in these like mass scale events that are like community oriented and are like have very low barriers to access. So definitely that's missing from the current environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing quickly from me before we move on to the next generation was you had in your research this stunning. Gen Zers spend an average of 6 hours and 5 minutes on their phone every single day. Now, what's really interesting about that figure is the context. So 6 hours and 5 minutes is 32% more time per day than the average American at 4 hours 37. It's also that 6 hours and change is 74% more time than boomers spend on their phones, which is people in their 60s and 70s. And that's already at 3.5 hours per day. So it's very high. Put another way, Gen Z spend close to 2 days per week looking at their phones. And that's according to a 2023 Harmony Health IT survey. 2 of the 7. What's happening?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's the state of the world. I mean, we use our phones for everything, right? And so like it is a lot of consuming content and consuming social media and keeping in touch with people. But it's also it's a tool, right? It's what we used to pay. It's what we used to check our finances. It's what we used to look up like places to eat. It's what we used to order food. So like it's kind of hard to detach from that. And a lot of industries have gotten rid of ways to contact people outside of staring at your screen. Like I tried to call so many companies and I get like automated formats or asked to like send an email. So like we kind of are also being pushed into that. And for Gen Zers who don't have the context of what it was like to live in a world before that happened, that is the only way they see it to be possible to reach these places.
Yeah, great take. Millennials, they're next. These folks are kind of late 20s to early 40s, 28 to 43. Yes. Thanks, Jenny, with the assist. So these people, what jumps out to you most about them, Paola?
Ooh, they're still on social. They're just not as visible as before, which I think we kind of talked about last time too. So like 93% of millennials are on social media and their presence continues to be massive. They're just not posting as much. And Gen Z is about to overtake them on several platforms, right? They've already kind of edged them out on YouTube. They're going to overtake them on Instagram by 2025. But they still rely on social media for communication, news, entertainment. And it's not as prevalent, I think, as it is with Gen Z, although I think it also kind of depends on the person. There are definitely people who have made an active effort to distance themselves from it and other people who have just like surrendered or like fully embraced it.
Yeah.
It's also our largest generation, ever so slightly overtaking now Gen Z, which is a large cohort. I kind of honed in on
Gen Z or Gen X?
It's actually Gen Z is just behind millennials as in terms of share. But like, Gen X is the smallest generation.
Okay,
so yeah. This millennial generation, I find, just kind of looking through a lot of the data, second screening is such a popular activity. And so I think the social coupled with watching something in the evening or a streaming or digital video while checking social is a pretty popular media habit for this generation.
Yeah. Or if you're like me, you're checking IMDb because you love movie trivia. So
I'm waiting for the research to come out where it's not just multi-screening, but it's how many screens. You know, what share of people are using 1, 2, 3, maybe plus, because I think we've gotten even to the point where now there are folks who are setting up, whether it's their phone with their laptop with their TV, or their phone with their tablet with their television, and there's kind of multiple screens happening at one time.
Let's dig in deeper. Like let's see how many tabs people have on there. How many we're running Spotify, we're running Zoom, we're running like crossword puzzles. Like how much are we juggling?
And then on top of that, the screens being divided up into like multiple windows. Sports is starting to introduce that more and more. The Olympics, you're able to watch 4 different events at one time. With football, with the NFL Red Zone, you're able to watch 4 things at one time. And those are, at least NFL Red Zone is ad-free. But I wonder what that looks like in terms of advertising and advertising attention when you're able to kind of flick back and forth between screens. Because even if you're not multi-screening at the same time, the ability to, whilst ads are happening in one place, move over to a different device, do something quickly, and then move back when the ads finish is really going to hit attention in terms of how much people are paying attention to the ads that are going on.
I'm interested to see like how sustained attitudes continue, because I read that Gen Z is more open to advertisements. Like that's just kind of like the price you pay for accessing the internet. Whereas like millennials for a long time, like really stuck by ad blockers and like trying to bypass all those things because they remembered a time before like advertisements were on the internet. So I'm wondering where the tipping point is going to be, if Gen Z is going to continue to have that attitude or if it's going to shift. Yeah.
Last thing for me quickly, I thought this was really a salient point that you make at the end of each of these generations. You have kind of a so what, a takeaway, if you will. And the one for millennials was there are just so many more ways to reach millennials than the 2 ones that most people know. Conventional wisdom tells you, Facebook and Instagram. If you look at who makes up the largest shares of these platforms by generation, millennials are the largest generation on Facebook by a lot, 33%, and the largest group on Instagram, 36%. Only just, as you mentioned, you're going to have Gen Z overtaking them next year. But they are also the dominant cohort on other platforms. You mentioned Reddit. So millennials make up 43%. All people, 43% of people on Reddit are millennials. That's 14 points higher than second place Gen Z.
It's the same share that Gen Zers hold on TikTok. So like they're
interesting.
They dominate
so it's that
platform
in reverse. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's a smaller scale because Reddit is like smaller users, but
true, good point.
But also our Reddit numbers only track logged in users too. So it's very possible that there's a lot higher degrees of use.
True. Yeah, true. And then 2 other platforms, WhatsApp. 37% of people on WhatsApp are millennials. That's 12 points higher than second place Gen Z. And then the other one you mentioned is LinkedIn. 36% of people on LinkedIn are millennials. That's 9 points higher than second place Gen X in this instance. Speaking of Gen X, let's get to them next. So Jenny, help me out. Mid to late 40s and into their 50s?
Right. 44 to 59.
Nailed it.
And when I think of Gen X, quite a few are parents. That's also true for millennials at this point as well. And then probably further along in their career, actually, sad to say, almost approaching retirement for the older Gen X. So firmly in the career. And I think that's a good segue to Pal's favorite fun fact about this report. I'll let you share it.
We were talking about it earlier. I think... So I know digital video is technically their top habit, which I do think we should touch on. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure to mention is that they have an impressive amount of LinkedIn usage. Like I know millennials are the largest population on the platform, but I don't think millennials leverage LinkedIn the same way that Gen Xers leverage LinkedIn. So one of the things to note is that LinkedIn, if we exclude YouTube, is one of the top 3 social platforms for Gen Xers, which is so different from everywhere else. It doesn't even crack that on for many other generations. And so I think LinkedIn offered an opportunity for Gen Xers to sort of transfer their in-person networking skills to online, because they were in that specific point in time, right? Like starting their professional careers, like understanding how to work with your network. It's not just about connecting with people. It's about like, who's in my alumni network? Who knows who? How do I get a face-to-face interview? How do I get an introductory interview? And so they have really thrived on that platform in the way that millennials are still catching up on, because so many people, their first introduction to social was like from more of a casual perspective and more of like a sort of like jokey perspective.
Yep.
I mean, it's definitely true of professional Gen Xers. Not everyone's a professional Gen Xer, but it is quite impressive.
Yeah. Well, I guess what's interesting about LinkedIn as well is that it's one of the oldest social networks, right? A lot of millennials, when LinkedIn was founded, which is around 2002, they were like high school age. It was actually founded a year before or after MySpace. And so the fact that that's still around, I mean, that's the social network that a lot of, speaking of growing up with social networks, is one that Gen X have grown up with. So the thing that jumped out to me with this generation was, in your research, Paula, you have that basically once you get Gen Xers in the digital video door, they're the most likely group to stick around. So it has some data from the Lending Tree, and it was saying that Gen X, the least likely to cancel their subscriptions.
Yeah.
So 66% versus 72% of the total population.
Yeah, I mean, Gen Xers have historically been very utilitarian about their approach on the internet, right? They want stuff that's like usable and like is the most efficient way of like accomplishing a habit. And so I don't know. I think their YouTube use is really high. Their Netflix use is pretty high. Their Disney Plus use is their third in place, which I think is not surprising given like how voraciously millennials and Gen Zers consume video. But as Jenny mentioned earlier, a lot of them are parents, right? So they're being attracted to platforms like Netflix and YouTube and Disney Plus partially because of the needs of their children, which is also an incentive not to cancel, but also because you were talking about the generation of like Star Wars and Marvel and like, I mean, people who have been hardcore Marvel fans since like the 70s and 80s. There are many reasons for them to keep subscribing and staying on top. Oh, also Sandman on Netflix, which is also from the 80s, is totally Gen X as well. And that's on like, you don't want to cancel before the next season comes out. I say that with no personal bias whatsoever.
Also, TV viewing is still relatively popular on this generation. We're looking at some data from YouGov about where people get their news, and Gen X and Boomers, TV is the number one source. Our Gen Z and Millennials, it's social media at this point for news.
Correct.
Interesting.
Correct.
Speaking of Boomers, let's move to our final group of people. Jenny, folks in their 60s and 70s at this point?
Yeah, 60 to 78.
Nailed it.
Are Boomers.
Yes, man. It's getting better and better. It's the only ages left, is what happened. But it was very generous of you, Paula. So Boomers, what jumps out to you most about these folks?
Okay. So I have to say digital shopping is their top digital habit, which makes sense. It's been that way for a long time. It definitely sped up during the pandemic. Nearly 2/3 of Boomers have made a digital purchase in the last 12 months. And some of the spending includes travel at higher rates than the rest of the population because they have more leisure time and they have the money, which is great for them. Very happy for them. Not jealous at all. But they're also picking up TikTok faster than any other platform. Like the increases that we're seeing on TikTok amongst that generation is pretty impressive. Like we can expect a 10.5% increase in the next year, and it'll continue to increase steadily through 2028.
That's like 1 million new people, right? We spoke about this.
Yeah, and the last episode,
month.
which everyone should go back and listen to because it was very fun.
Yeah. That was social media use by generation. And yeah, I mean, it's 10% and it's from a small base, but it does mean 1 million new Boomers will join TikTok by next year.
Yeah. And it's impressive because people often write them off, right? Like that they don't want, they're not inclined to try new trends or sign on or learn something new. And no, there is a cohort of Boomers who are very interested in keeping up. And a lot of them are also motivated by staying in touch with their loved ones who are on these platforms. So we should not discount them as a very powerful cohort. Also, they have a lot of money. So, there's that.
They do. Jenny, when you think about this Boomer generation, what jumps out to you about how they're using digital things?
Right. A little trite, but still firmly on Facebook and kind of our highest penetration for Facebook users there for this. I think it still is that connectivity and connection to family and friends. So I do think, Facebook, not anything new, not really a revelation here, but
also one thing to not discount too is that Facebook is kind of tying its platforms more closely together, and it's kind of prompting people on Facebook to get Instagram and WhatsApp and sort of like, so we're also starting to see an uptick of baby boomers on Instagram as well, just because it automatically does it for you. So why not?
Yeah. And isn't it the case where, I mean, they're on Facebook, but they're like really on Facebook? Like, right, Paolo, didn't you, something in your research about how like 90% or like basically all of their social media time or use goes to that one platform?
Yeah, I mean, if they're on social media, so I think it's only half of the generation that is on social media, they are most likely on Facebook. Like that is the number one platform, which makes sense because that's where you're going to find out about your family the whole time, right? And you're going to post updates. And like, I've definitely anecdotally have seen people who write like, today Mary and I went out to the zoo and we did this and that, and then like pretty much announcements for their community so that everybody can stay up to date on their life, which is lovely and very cute.
More boomer friends. Posts I'm looking for.
No, I was just gonna be like, I'd rather focus on that than like the gossip or like the misinformation.
Absolutely.
But
the one thing that jumps out to me about this group was that they have this is kind of tied into the very heavy Facebook use or preferred Facebook use over other platforms. Boomers have a very short list of popular digital activities. So close to half, as you mentioned, Paula, close to half of them are on YouTube and Facebook. But then you go down to 1/3 who are on Netflix. And then it's a real sharp drop to 4th place, Pinterest and Instagram basically tied, less than 1 in 5 boomers on these platforms. Whereas if you look at the Gen Z folks, it's like, I don't know, 60 to 80% of them are on 5 different platforms. For millennials, they're a similar share on 4 different platforms, and it keeps going down and down. And for boomers, it's only 2 of them that are on YouTube and Facebook. Half of them are on YouTube and Facebook, and then it's a significant drop off to 3rd and a real far drop off to 4th, 5th, 6th, etc.
We have a parallel with that with device usage as well, that we have some data from LRG Group, usually just using a TV or a smartphone, just 1/3 are watching video somewhere other than a TV. So the majority. Then we have about 8 in 10 millennials or Gen Z who are watching video on other devices other than a TV, right?
Yeah, smart, whatever. Well, that's all we've got time for today's episode. Thank you so much to my guests for hanging out with me today. Thank you to Paula.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's always so much fun.
Yes, indeed. Thank you to Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you to Victoria. She edits the show. Stuart runs the team. Sophie does our social media. And thanks to everyone for listening in to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by TikTok. Tomorrow, you can hang out with Rob Rubin, host of our banking and payment show, where he'll be speaking with Grace Broadbent and Jacob Bourne, all about how to mitigate the threat of AI in the financial sector.